Afternoon sunlight poured through the striped blinds of Millie's Corner Cafe, turning the red booths gold. Caleb, a quiet 9-year-old boy, sipped his chocolate milkshake while sketching superheroes on a napkin. Behind the counter, Rick, the cook with a short fuse, cursed under his breath after burning an order. His apron was stained, his temper worse. When Caleb accidentally knocked his straw, a drop of milkshake splashed across the counter. Rick spun around, eyes narrowing. "Watch it, kid!" "I'm sorry, sir," Caleb whispered. But before the boy could pull back, Rick's hand clamped on his wrist, too hard, too fast, and the sharp crack of a slap echoed through the diner. Every sound died. A fork froze midair. Even the jukebox stuttered into silence. Caleb's wide eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Rick scoffed, muttering, "Kids these days need to learn manners." And then, the man in the gray suit at the corner booth slowly folded his newspaper, laid it on the table, and stood up. But when the man in the tailored gray suit stood up from the corner booth, every breath in that diner stopped. Earlier that morning, Millie's Corner Cafe felt like any other slow day. The smell of bacon, maple syrup, and fresh coffee drifted through the air as Darius Cole and his son Caleb stepped inside. Millie, the owner, greeted them with a wide smile. "Morning, Mr. Cole, the usual booth?" Darius nodded politely. "Thank you, Millie. And one chocolate milkshake for my little man." Caleb grinned, climbing onto the red leather seat, swinging his legs beneath the table. Darius unfolded his newspaper, the headline catching his eye. "Local crime family under federal investigation." His brow twitched for half a second before his calm returned, the paper rustling softly. From the kitchen, Rick's voice carried, loud, irritated, snapping at waitresses for small mistakes. Darius looked up once, eyes cool and unreadable. "Patience feeds the soul," he murmured, almost to himself. Caleb giggled. "Dad, why do people always listen when you whisper?" Darius smiled faintly, eyes on his son. "Because yelling means you've already lost." Now back in the present, that same calm seemed heavier, colder. The paper he'd once held lay folded on the counter, untouched. Rick's laughter had died, replaced by the sound of his own breathing. He stared at his hand, the one that had just struck the wrong boy. The waitresses froze behind the counter. The ceiling fan creaked above, and even the jukebox's hum seemed to fade as Darius finally stood. He adjusted his cufflinks, smoothed his jacket, and turned toward the man who had just learned what silence before a storm really feels like. And when Darius finally folded his newspaper, the entire diner seemed to fold with it. The diner was so still you could hear the clock ticking above the coffee machine. Darius's polished shoes clicked softly against the tile as he walked toward the counter, each step deliberate, slow, and heavy with control. He stopped beside his son, crouching down until he was eye level. Caleb's small hands trembled as he clutched his napkin, the sketch of his superhero now smudged with milkshake. Darius took out a folded white handkerchief, dabbing gently at his son's cheek. "Did he hurt you, son?" His tone was calm, too calm. Caleb shook his head, though his voice quivered. "I'm okay, Dad." Rick cleared his throat, voice cracking. It was an accident. "I didn't mean—" Darius stood, eyes lifting slowly to meet his. "An accident," he repeated softly, almost tasting the word. He turned to the manager, who looked like she wanted to vanish. "What's your policy for hitting children in your establishment?" I'll handle it, Mr. "No," Darius interrupted gently, his voice carrying across the room like a knife through glass. "You won't." Just then, the soft ding of the front doorbells broke the silence. Two men in black suits stepped in, their movements quiet, coordinated. They didn't speak. They just stood by the door, eyes sharp, waiting. Rick's confusion melted into realization. Who are you people?" One waitress leaned to another and whispered, trembling, "That's Darius Cole, the one from the papers." The other's eyes widened. "The Cole family? The ones that own half the docks?" "Half?" the first whispered. "Try all of them." Rick's breathing grew uneven. His hands, the same ones that had just slapped a child, now hung frozen by his sides. Darius took a step closer, lowering his voice. You see, Rick, when a man lays a hand on something precious to me, I don't shout. I just remember. The air grew thick, the light seeming dimmer, the sound of the ceiling fan louder than breath. He turned slightly toward the staff, his tone polite, almost businesslike. Now, before I decide what happens next, I have one question. What would you do if you were there? Stay silent or stand up for what's right, no matter who's watching. And then Darius asked one question that turned the whole diner into a courtroom. Darius stood still, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the tense silence. He looked directly at the trembling cook. What's your name? Rick's voice cracked. Rick Tanner. Darius tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Not with anger, but with memory. You ever hear of a man named Samuel Tanner? Rick blinked, confused. That's my dad. Why? Darius took one slow step closer, lowering his voice. He used to work for me. Before he crossed me, the words hit like thunder. Forks clinked softly against untouched plates. Rick's face drained of color. Darius didn't need to say more. The weight of that sentence did the work for him. Behind him, his two men shifted subtly, their presence heavy but silent. The entire diner understood. This wasn't about violence. It was about control. Then Darius turned toward Caleb, his tone softening instantly. What should we do, son? The little boy looked up, eyes wet, voice trembling but clear. Let him go, Dad. You said yelling means losing. Darius paused, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. You heard him. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick roll of bills, and tossed it onto the counter. For the mess! Then his gaze returned to Rick, steady, unblinking. Next time you lift a hand, he said quietly, make sure it's to help someone. The words lingered like smoke in the air. Darius turned, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Together they walked toward the door, the men in suits following at a respectful distance. Share this if you still believe real power is silent, not loud. But as Darius and Caleb walked out, one small gesture from the boy left even his father speechless. The doorbell jingled softly as Darius and Caleb stepped out into the cool afternoon air. Behind them, the diner remained frozen, silent witnesses to something they couldn't explain, but would never forget. Inside, Caleb's napkin drawing lay on the counter. A superhero stood tall, shielding a smaller figure behind him, a child smiling in safety. Millie picked it up gently, her eyes misting. By closing time, she had already framed it, hanging it near the register with a small note beneath it. Kindness is strength. The next morning, Rick didn't show up for work. He never did again. Word spread that he'd started volunteering at a youth shelter across town, teaching kids how to cook, always patient, always gentle. When someone asked him why, he just said quietly, because someone gave me a second chance. A few days later, Darius drove down the quiet highway, his car gliding through golden light. Caleb slept in the back seat, small fingers curled around his toy hero. Darius glanced in the mirror and whispered to his driver, "He's already stronger than me." Weeks passed, and Millie's Corner Cafe changed. The place felt different, warmer. Families came not for the food, but for the peace in the air. A quiet legacy born not from power, but restraint. One evening, Darius returned, sliding into his usual booth. Millie brought his coffee, her smile knowing. Caleb ran ahead, hugging her tight before sitting to draw again. As Darius stirred his coffee, watching his boy laugh, he exhaled deeply. The kind of peace that only comes after walking away from darkness without letting it touch you. The camera slowly zooms out, the framed drawing glowing softly under the cafe lights. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength humbles cruelty. What if the loudest justice in the world was delivered in silence?